All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
One of the hardest parts about doing this job and working in the daily news is having some perspective on the day's events in the context of broader history. It is so cliche in Washington to call everything historic or a game changer. Almost 99% of things that people say that are those things are not. But the longer Trump has been off the stage, I have to say, I am truly stunned at just how much he changed American foreign policy. It's, in my opinion, for the better towards China with his 2016 campaign and his 4 years in office. The impetus for writing this monologue came with some major news in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, ignored by everybody. Joe Biden's new appointment for the U.S. Trade Representative, Katherine Tai, said the United States isn't ready to lift China tariffs, telling them, quote, no negotiator walks away from leverage, and said that under her leadership, she is committed to trade policy, quote, focused on workers and individuals rather than solely as consumers. Now, I cannot emphasize to all of you how seismic of a shift that is in American policy. What Tai just said was considered a fringe economic view in American economic discourse just 5 years ago, including in the Obama administration that she served in. There were maybe 2 senators in all of Washington who ever said anything similar. And the only outside cranks who dared to sound similar were people like Peter Navarro. Now, Trump showed that not only are tariffs to protect American jobs, workers, and manufacturing popular, but that the doomsday scenario that the billionaires laid out over and over again is a complete lie. U.S. economy didn't implode. U.S. stock market went up. American companies sourced products from allied countries, or they did that dreaded thing where they made things here in America and they paid actual Americans to do it. The horror. The victory over the so-called free trade lobby, aka the billionaire lobby, cannot be overstated. That President Joseph R. Biden, the man who voted for NAFTA enthusiastically, who was a major proponent and bragged about permanent normal trade relations with China, and even said they were not our competitor in January of 2019, is going to keep hundreds of billions of dollars on tariff on China. To have a trade representative who even says she cares about wages, that is a victory you cannot even describe. Of course, devil's in the details. Rhetoric is half the battle. If they try and backtrack, or if they fold, or if they don't renew, then both the right and the progressive left can hammer them home for betraying their promise. They will never sign a trade agreement again without thinking of the political price that Hillary Clinton paid in 2016. That's how we should want these people living in fear of us. And tariffs aren't the only place that the United States has dramatically changed policy on China. The hallmark of establishment liberalism, which peaked under Obama, was extraordinary faith in multilateral institutions like the United Nations or the World Health Organization. People like me from the sidelines have noted for a long time multilateral institutions are often used by authoritarian regimes like China, who break the rules to just use them as a cover for their bad behavior. COVID, of course, exposed all of this at the WHO. Even when they believed China in the beginning, the virus wasn't airborne, when they consistently apologized for that country, refused to acknowledge the existence of Taiwan, and more. But have most recently beclouded themselves with something I touched on yesterday, their cover-up of the lab leak hypothesis. The WHO has allowed the Chinese government to basically run their investigation into the lab leak. And shocker, the Chinese government-approved report found that the coronavirus likely spread from animals to humans, despite never, ever visiting the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And it was only written by people approved by the CCP. The report even literally stated, quote, further research in every area except the lab leak hypothesis. Pay no attention at all to the man behind the curtain. But what stunned me is not that you're hearing this level of skepticism from me, not from Joe Rogan or Fox News, but from Joe Biden's own Secretary of State. Let's take a listen.
Look, I think that there's a report coming out shortly by the World Health Organization. We've got real concerns about the methodology and the process that went into that report, including the fact that the government in Beijing apparently helped to write it. But let's see what comes out in that report. But we do need to have both accountability for the past, but I think our focus needs to be on building a stronger system for the future.
That's right. Tony Blinken, who as recently as 2017 was using his former position to hawk business for entering the Chinese market, is out there saying the WHO report on the origins of the coronavirus cannot be trusted because of CCP influence. That is something that would just not have occurred in the Obama administration. It is my firm belief if Trump was never president, you would never see anything like this. I have been consistently shocked at the Biden administration at nearly every turn on this front. Blinken saying he would keep Uyghur genocide distinction, sanctioning Chinese officials hours before they arrive on U.S. soil, and angering them so much they threw a tantrum here, as well as keeping tariffs on China. Beijing is realizing slowly they simply cannot exploit our system for 40 years, buy our billionaire class, and that everything's just going to be hunky-dory. The beauty of this story is about small d democratic victory. The goal of politics is to win. It's to force your opponents to capitulate. And the greatest victory is forcing people who you really don't like and who have done the opposite of the right thing, that you copy you for political benefit. It's called ideological capture. It's what the neoliberals did on deficits and foreign wars in Washington for decades. And for the first time in many years, we may rule the public domain in a tiny area. My only hope is we have many more successes like this to celebrate in the years to come, and that we use this as a lesson on how to win. I think looking at it, from a grand strategic point of view, it's crazy. I mean, to hear the U.S. trade representative for Free Trade Joe say we're keeping hundreds of billions of dollars on China, despite all this Wall Street money that flowed into his coffers, despite all the phone calls and the pressure that he's gotten from people who work for him, who lobbied against the Chinese tariffs. I think it's remarkable, and it shows how politically untenable it would be for him to come in and remove those tariffs. Now look, maybe he removes them for some bullshit reason in the future. Very likely, actually, and if he does, then I'll call it out here. But the mere fact that he has to justify it and use the worker language, that's a victory. I mean, we have not been able to talk this way for 40 years. And finally, everybody's talking this way. That's real victory. When you force your opponents to talk like you win.
It's really interesting because what Trump basically did is he called the bluff because there was all this, you can't do this. It's going to be a trade war. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be horrible. Economy. It's going to destroy all of that. And I think that there were farmers who it has been hard on for sure. I'm not saying that there was no impact whatsoever. Farmers who, by the way, were already getting wildly screwed and no one seemed to give a damn about except when it came to protecting the bottom line interest of American corporate power. So he called their bluff, and he was like, I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, it probably was the one policy of the Trump administration. There were a few things, but this was one of the better policies of the Trump administration that I was behind from the beginning, and that I think you're right to say has changed the mindset, because it's just exposed that all of the scaremongering around some of these tactics were completely hollow. Yeah. They were all just about, I'm worried about my bottom line profit margin interest. And so when he levied these tariffs and the world didn't end, it really opened a door and exposed what a fraud all of that has been. I want to give Biden some credit here, though, directly as well, which is that I think some of the better moves that he's made as compared to Obama is because they see themselves as different classes. So in reality, they're both very wealthy men. Yeah. In reality, they've both carried water for corporate interests and Wall Street and done, been all on board with the free trade agenda, all of that for their entire career. But Obama really saw himself as part of the global elite. He really saw himself. We talked here about how he was super cozy with all the Silicon Valley guys. He thought about going into venture capital himself. Richard Branson. The first thing after he leaves out, he's hanging out with Richard Branson. He sees himself as part of that set. Biden sees himself as having been looked down on by that set and trying to prove that set wrong about him his entire life and his entire career. Went to a state school, didn't do all that particularly well, came from kind of hard scrabble upbringing, and carries this self-identity, even though, again, it's been belied by what he's actually done on policy for his entire career. But his personal identity, how he thinks of himself, is really as working class Joe. So when these global elites come to him and are like, you can't do this, et cetera, I don't know that that gets to him as much as it got to Obama. I'm glad. He doesn't see them as his friends, as his personal social circle. He's sort of famously, you remember during the primary, he couldn't raise any money because he basically, he won the seat in Delaware and he's just been there forever. So he didn't have a fundraising network. He didn't do all of the call time and the donor schmoozing and build out this big network over years and years. He actually was a terrible, terrible fundraiser, which in some ways is a good thing. So look, I don't want to say like he's amazing and perfect and he doesn't do their bidding whatsoever. We all remember him going to Wall Street and saying, don't worry guys, nothing's going to fundamentally change. But I do think that his personal self-conception and the fact that he doesn't see himself as part of that club has made him somewhat better in some of these areas than we thought he was going to be.
I agree. And I think that also what happened is his position here and his keeping of it means that if you're an aspirational neoliberal, somebody like Pete Buttigieg or whatever, you're not taking those tariffs off. Even if you win, there's just no way. Now, you might use it for like climate or whatever, or for McKinsey, et cetera, to compel them to let more McKinsey offices open in Beijing. But the principle is the same. And as long as we have that principle and it's normalized in American politics, then they can't take it away from us.
You can curse them with McKinsey as we've been cursed with McKinsey.
The real way to defeat China is to turn them into a version of us. All right.
Emily Jashinsky and Max Alvarez are going to join us next for the panel. Stay with us.